We're finally getting to the point where we're finishing up the series. The last big things to do in terms of gameplay are happening this video. So congratulations for making it this far, and let's jump right into things. We're going to be creating a win state in this video, which won't take very long at all, which means most of this video's time is going to be spent creating the UI for the game, finalizing some features, and then we'll do some cleanup in the next video and prepare it for export. So to get started here, we have a few different ways we could do this. We could just create an actor blueprint here for our win trigger, but I think the best way to do this is just to go all the way to the end. I'm going to go ahead and speed up my camera here to something like 6 to reach the end faster, and then turn it back down to 4 to have a little bit more precision now that I'm here. And I'm going to drop in a box trigger from the place actors panel here on the left. I'm going to drag this over here, drop it right there. First, I'm going to change the box extent here to something like 50 by 50 by 50, and then I'm going to set the scale here, 5 on the X, 15 on the Y, and 10 on the Z. And just for fun, I'm going to come down here to the line thickness if you have this option, and I'm going to change this to 10 just so we can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to bring our box up here on the Z up until it's sitting on the top of our plane here. As you can see, it's not sitting perfectly, so I'm just going to change the snapping here from 100 down to 50, and there we go. Now it's sitting exactly on the top. And of course, it doesn't need to be this big, but I think it works for us here just so we can see it better, and just so if we accidentally enter it too fast, we will still hit the box somewhere to win the level. That's a common problem in older games, is the way that frames are captured. You might start one frame here and then the next frame suddenly be right here outside of the trigger, so you never actually hit it. Fun fact, that's why the infinite staircase in Mario 64 can be skipped. So technically, if we wanted to avoid that, we could just make this a super long box on the X. So instead of 5, something like 500, and then just move it over, so that way no matter what frame we end up in, we're still in the box. But I really don't think that's necessary for this game. I think this works just fine. But now, if we ever enter this trigger, it's not actually going to do anything yet. It won't be visible in game, and the reason for that is over here in the details panel, you can come down here to rendering. You can see visible, but that's for the editor, and it says actor hidden in game is true. We could just disable this, so now we will see it in game, and once we reach it, you can see the box sitting there, and we don't want that, but I think it's good for now for us to see where it is. As you can see, I hit it and nothing happened. And there are a few different reasons for this. First being in the player. So if we go into our player here, we're going to select our viewport so we can see what we're selecting here, go to our static mesh component. And last time we made sure that the simulation generates hit events is checked, but we did not select generate overlap events. So no matter if we overlap this trigger or not, it's not checking it. So we need to make sure that this is true, otherwise we will never actually interact with this trigger. So I'm going to compile this and save and close this blueprint. And there are a few different ways we can make our trigger actually interact with things in the scene. First of which being in the level blueprint. So if I came up here to the top blueprints, open level blueprint, we can actually access the trigger that we just created in here simply by looking for trigger box. And you can see create a reference to trigger box, or we can just drag it in from the world outliner and drop it onto our graph. And we can see trigger box from persistent level. So the current level that's currently open has this trigger box in it, and we can get information from it. And you could actually get events from this as well. As long as you have a object in your world outliner selected, you can right click and it gives you a few options at the top. First thing, create a reference. Second thing, add events and call functions. So add event, if we wanted to do a collision event on begin overlap, we could do that here. And now in the level, we have access to this trigger box and we're doing things based on the trigger box itself. We're not going to do it this way, but that is a way that you can do it if you would like. Instead, what we want to do is we want to give this trigger a script. So let's go over here to the right and turn this into a blueprint. So I'm just going to click that blueprint / add script button. The trigger box is going to be our parent class. It's going to be a new subclass. I'm going to name this BP_win game and select it, and it'll create the blueprint for us and open it up here. As you can see, it's going to keep the same dimensions and everything. Now we could do the same thing that we did before where we right clicked our collision component and added a on component begin overlap, but I think I'm going to use this event begin overlap this time instead, just to show that it can be done both ways. So just going to get rid of our event begin play and our event tick functions here. And then off of the other actor here, even though this is grayed out, once we do something, it'll automatically change that. So we're just going to come off of the other actor here and we're going to cast to our player, which would be BP player right here. And as you can see, now it's no longer grayed out and everything's connected. This other actor here is the actor that caused this event to be called. So the actor that actually overlapped the current actor that we're using. Now we're going to create another function over here in our game instance. Let's go ahead and close this one, go back to our game instance here, and we're going to create another custom event, add custom event. We're going to name this win game. And then we're going to have another one as well. This will be a custom event called show credits. That's all we need to do for now. We don't actually have to do anything off of these. I just want to be able to reference them. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and close this blueprint. And once again, come back to our win game trigger here. And now we're going to create two variables here. They're both going to be public. And these variables are going to contain information that define what happens after we beat a level. So the first variable here is going to be next level. Make sure it's public by clicking this little eye icon again. I'm going to change the variable type to name. And then we're going to create another variable here, add a variable. And this variable is going to be called show credits. This is also going to be public. We're going to change this to a Boolean. I'm going to compile this, and next level by default can be none, and show credits by default should be false. Now we're going to create a branch by holding B and left clicking, and off of the success of this cast node here, we're going to connect it up to the branch, and we're going to check if we want to show credits. If we do, we're going to get our game instance again by casting this game instance to the BP game instance that we created. And then we are going to show credits by using that function that we created earlier. There we go. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy this cast node here and paste it down here as well, because even if we're not showing credits, we're still going to be doing something. And this time we're going to be winning the game by calling the win game function. But before we actually win the game, we need to load a level. There are a few different ways we can do this. We could just load the level first and then call the win game function, but I think it's actually better to just call the win game function and load the level within that function to keep things even cleaner. So what we need to do is double click this win game function here to open up its current location, and we're actually going to add an input to this event. Let's go over here to the details panel on the right under inputs. We're going to press this little new parameter button here to add an input, and this is going to be the name of the level that we want to load. This will be next level. I'm going to once again change this to a name value. I'm going to compile this. I'm going to return to our win game blueprint here, and now you can see we have another argument here. And all I'm going to do is take our next level variable that we created, drop it in here, get it, and connect it up to this argument. Now, whenever we hit this end game trigger, we're going to check if we want to show credits, which if we don't, then we're going to win the game currently and load the next level. But if we do want to show the credits, we're just going to show the credits immediately and not actually change to the next level. And the reason that we cast to our player here, instead of just immediately moving forward because we're not getting any information from it, is just to make sure that the player is the one who triggered this and not some enemy or some other object, some physics object or something. Whatever hits this trigger is going to run this event. We want to make sure that the player is the one that actually caused this event to be triggered. So we can compile this. We're going to close this here. And now over here on the right, you'll see two new options in the default category here for this win game: the next level and whether or not we want to show credits. And I'm not going to actually define these yet just because we don't have any other levels, but later when we actually create more levels, we will make sure to define what level this trigger will take us to, or if we're going to go to a new level at all, or if we're just going to show credits. Before we actually create the functionality to win the game, let's create a widget for it. Let's go ahead and come over here to widgets. I'm going to right click, come down here to user interface, and create another widget blueprint. This will be WBP_win game. And I'm going to double click on this to open it up. And what I want to do is I want the screen to go white and then show some text. So the first thing I want to do here is actually just add an image. I'm going to drag in this image here, just drop it anywhere, and I'm going to change the anchor to full screen. And when I do this, what I like to do is change the offset. Instead of just 0 by 0 by 0 by 0, I like to actually add something like -10 by -10 by -10 by -10. And the reason for that is if there's any overlap on any different size screen, it'll just give it a few pixels to still actually fill the entire screen. You don't have to do that. I like to do that anyways, just to be sure. I'm going to come over here to our hierarchy and actually give this a name. This will just be background. You can rename it by pressing F2 or just coming up here to the details to change it, or if you just click on it and then click on it again, you can change it there as well. Next, I'm going to bring in a vertical box. This is a container for us to hold multiple different widgets under to keep things organized. I'm just going to drop this on the canvas panel here in the hierarchy. It'll drop it in the very top left, but I'm going to organize this a little bit better. We're going to set the anchor to the top center right here. The position on the X will be 0. I think the position on the Y should be something like 450. The size size to something like 930 on the X and 470 on the Y. And then obviously changing the anchor to 0.5 by 0.5 to set it right in the center of all of that. You can mess with these values as much as you'd like. This is just what I found in my example project to work best for me. Next, we're going to place two pieces of text in here. So I'm just going to look for text. I'm going to bring in this text value underneath the vertical box here. Make sure you drop it on the vertical box so it actually enters the inside of it. First thing I'm going to do is change the color and opacity of the text value here to black. I'm going to change the text to level because we're going to say level complete. And I'm going to change the font family to thin so that we have that nice little thin text value again. I'm going to center its justification, and I'm going to change this setting up here called size to fill, and the horizontal and vertical alignment are fine. They're both going to fill fully. And now I'm just going to change this size value for the font to something like 200. There we go. And now I'm going to add another piece of text as well in the vertical box, and this will be at the very bottom. The order that these pieces of text are in the vertical box are actually in the order that they are in the hierarchy. So this level text will come first at the top, and this text block will come at the bottom. And if we added anything else, it would just go 1, 2, and then continue going down. This text block, I'm also going to change the size to fill and leave it at both horizontal and vertical fill. I'm going to change this text to say complete, and I need to change the color and opacity back to black again. I'm going to leave it at Roboto bold, and I'm going to change the size to 109. We'll see how that works. Also centering the justification. I think that might be a little bit too big, so maybe 105. That works for me. So there we go. Now it says level complete, nice in the center. And now we're going to create a nice little next level button. So I'm going to come over here to our palette again and look for button and just drag in this button onto the canvas panel here. I'm just going to select our button here, and we're going to set its anchor to the bottom center, set its position on the X to 0, its position on the Y to negative 350, its size on the X to 500, and on the Y to 150. And once again, setting the alignment to 0.5 by 0.5 to center it out. And as you can see, the button's overlapping this vertical box a little bit, which is fine. We won't see the vertical box, and I think this looks nice in game. Now I'm also going to change the style a little bit, and this is something you can mess with by creating your own custom buttons in something like Photoshop or GIMP or something. But I think what we're going to do to keep with the simplistic style is just change some of these images here. Instead of using the default, we're going to change this to something like a gray texture, which there's actually a texture for this called 127 gray, but we're not seeing it right now because in the view options I have engine content disabled. So I'm just going to go ahead, come down here to view options and show engine content, and the first option we have here is the 127 gray. I'm just going to select that. That looks nice to me. I am going to give it a slight darker tint. That's our normal image complete. I'm going to close this normal tab here. I'm going to open our hovered tab. Once again, changing our image to the 127 gray. I'm going to leave the tint to white when we hover over it. Just go ahead and close that one. And then when we press it, once again, changing the image to 127 gray and changing the tint to a very dark gray. We don't need to worry about when it's disabled, and we don't need to worry about the color and opacity and background color, but we do need to make sure that we add some text on top of it. So let's go ahead and come over here to the left, look for text, just drop our text onto the button here. I'm going to change this text to next level. I'm going to change it to our thin font again, and we're going to change the size to something like 50. And there we go. That looks nice. I'm also going to adjust the padding slightly because I think it might look nicer if I add 4 on the left and right, but 30 on the top and bottom, and you'll see why in just a second. Just keeps it better in the center. Doesn't necessarily change too much, but now it's much more centered if this button were to change its size. Let's go ahead and compile and save this. I'm going to rename this button real quick to next level. Compile that once again, save this, and we're just going to close this. Come back to our blueprints here, open up our game instance, and whenever we win the game, we're going to create a widget like we did before for the score. Connect this up here, and we're going to select this class here, win game, and then we're going to add to viewport. There we go. I'm going to compile this and save it. So now whenever we win the game, it will add this to our viewport. So let's see if we can make it. If I go all the way to the end of the level and enter the box trigger, boom, we complete the level. But that looks a little bit weird because we're just immediately completing the level. We're not actually seeing any animation for this or anything, and I think that might look a lot nicer. So let's go ahead and go back to our widgets folder, open up our win game once again, and now we're going to create an animation, starting with our background image here. Let's just come down here to the bottom, add an animation, and this is going to be called fade. Make sure you select your fade animation here, and now we're going to start actually animating some things, which is fairly straightforward, but can be a little complicated and confusing at first. So let's go ahead and select select our background here. We don't really care about any buttons going on down here. All we care about are adding keyframes to animate, because animation works frame by frame. So we're going to start out with the color and opacity over here under appearance. See, color and opacity. You see this little button here adds a keyframe for this property to the current animation. So we're going to go ahead and click this here. We're going to drop the opacity, the alpha value down here, down to 0, hit OK, and add a keyframe. And then after about 1 second, I think is a good amount, we're going to change this value back from 0 to 1 and add a keyframe. And as you can see, it automatically gives us a nice little fade for it here. But the text is still just kind of already sitting there. So let's take care of the text. So let's go ahead and grab our level text, and we're going to do pretty much the same thing, but I think having a nice little offset is a good idea. Starting at about 1.25, we're going to change the alpha value of the color and opacity down to 0, hit OK, add a keyframe, and at about 2.5, we're going to change this value back up to 1, hit OK, and add another keyframe. And once again, now it will fade in. At about 1.75, I'm going to go ahead and click on our complete text here, change our alpha value of our color and opacity down to 0, hit OK, add a keyframe, and once again at 2.5, I'm just going to change this value up to 1, hit OK, and add a keyframe again. And finally for the button, at about 2.75, I'm going to go ahead and click on this button as a whole, which will take care of the text as well. And we need to change both of these values, both color and opacity and background color. The background color takes care of the button, the color and opacity takes care of the contents inside of the button. Let's go ahead and change the color and opacity down to 0, hit OK, add a keyframe. We're also going to change our background color here down to 0 on the alpha, hit OK, and add a keyframe. And then at about 3.25, we're going to increase our alpha values on both the color and opacity and the background color back up to 1 and add a keyframe for both. And there we go. Now if I come back here, we can go ahead and play our animation by coming down to the timeline here and hitting play. And boom, it all fades in and looks nice. There we go. Let's go ahead and hit compile and save. But now I need to make sure that that animation plays whenever this widget is created. To do this, it's pretty simple. Let's go ahead and go to our graph here, and we're going to get rid of our event pre-construct and get rid of our event tick. We're just going to worry about event construct. Whenever this widget is constructed, basically whenever this widget is created anywhere in the game, we're going to play animation. Don't worry about forward, reverse, doesn't matter. We're going to specify that in this function here. So play animation. And then over here on the left, we have this animation called fade in our variables that we just created. I'm going to drag this in, drop it there. We're going to get fade. We're going to connect this to our in animation. And that's all we need to do. Everything else is specifications, where it starts, how many times it plays, which direction it plays, what speed. We don't need to worry about any of that. But now, whenever we play, you'll see another problem whenever we beat our level here. The text shows up immediately and then fades in like it normally would. And that's because by default, it's all showing. The background didn't show up by default because that's the first thing that comes in. So what we're going to do is we're going to change all of these values real quick here. Come over here to background, make sure your animation is not selected. If it is, it'll add keyframes and you don't want that. So we're going to come over here to background. We're going to change our color and opacity on the background, changing the alpha value down to 0 by default, hit OK. And we're going to do the same thing with both of our text values, coming over here to color and opacity, changing the opacity down to 0 on both of them, and then coming over here to the button and changing both color and opacity and background color down to 0 on the alpha as well. And there we go. Now nothing is visible by default, so whenever we beat the level, the animation fades in and plays completely. But we can't select our next level button because we don't have a mouse. And this is where a big problem that a lot of you have been having gets solved. I've seen quite a few comments now saying that when you play, you don't get any control. And that's because you need to click into the editor for control. Whenever I hit play right now, the game is not automatically detecting that this game is supposed to consume input. So I can still click on things over here in the editor and not be bothered. So if I wanted to type down here, it would still accept input. But the moment that I click into our game window, we accept input and the mouse goes away. That's great for gameplay. The fact that it doesn't happen by default is a little bit annoying, and we'll fix that in just a second. But it also is a problem for menus because now we don't have a mouse. We have to tell the game to show our mouse. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our win game widget here, go back to our graph, and we're we're going to add an event here, which I actually learned about recently. This is a really cool event that makes animation really simple. So instead of just adding a delay for however long your animation is, there's an event that literally just checks when the animation finishes. So event on animation finished, this event right here. First, we need to make sure that the animation is the right one that's playing. So we're just going to use an equal check. So if the animation that just finished is equal to our fade animation that we drag in here, we're going to add a branch here to make this an if statement. Just connect this execution pin up here and plug this into the condition. If the animation that just finished is the fade animation, then we're going to do a few things. First, we need to get the player controller, and we're going to set show mouse cursor from that player controller. That's the only way to show the mouse cursor. There's no easier way. It is using the player controller input here. And we're going to set this to true. Then we're also going to use our player controller to set the input mode. And this is what's going to change us from consuming the mouse to not consuming the mouse. We're going to set input mode to UI only. That way, no gameplay inputs will be detected, but the mouse inputs will. We can connect this up here. It automatically connected the player controller up, and the widget in focus is the one that we're currently on. So we're just going to get a reference to self. And we don't need to lock the mouse. We need to give it free reign so we can move around and click on things. We can just compile this and save this. And now, whenever we play, right now, I'm moving my mouse and nothing is showing up because the mouse is fully consumed by the game. But now, once this animation completes, my mouse shows up and now I can click this button for next level. Now, what about stopping us from having to hit play and then click in the game to actually have input? Well, we can do that simply by coming to our blueprints here, going into our player, coming up to the event begin play that we set up here, and right after we add the score to our screen, we're going to do basically the same thing we just did. We're going to get our player controller. We're going to set the input mode, but this time it's going to be game only. And then there's no other arguments for this function. So there we go. Now, whenever we hit play, immediately we're consuming input. We don't have to worry about clicking in the game anymore. I know that was a frustration for a lot of you, and I'm sorry I didn't cover it sooner, but that's just something that fit better in this video where we're already working with it for UI. Next thing we want to do is actually allow that next level button to take us to the next level. So let's go ahead and go into our widgets again, open up our win game widget here, go ahead and click on your next level button here. We're going to scroll down to the bottom on the details here, and we're going to hit this on pressed button. We could use on clicked. I prefer to use on pressed because I believe this works for everything, whether it be a console input, a touch input, or a click input. So we can just use on pressed, and it'll immediately take us to our graph and create a new function here for us. And now we need to be able to know which level to open. So obviously we can just use the function open level by name, but we don't know what the name of the level is. So to do this, we need to create a variable here. This is going to be next level. Once again, we're going to go ahead and change our expose on spawn to true. We're going to change this variable type to name and make sure that we hit this little eye icon to make it public. We're just going to go ahead and connect the next level variable to the level name that we're going to open. And you can just drag and drop this onto the pin and it'll automatically connect it. Connect our execution pin here, compile this and save this. But now we need to define this variable. If we come over here to our blueprints, come back to our game instance, now this variable that we worked with earlier is going to come into play, because as you can see, immediately it's asking for what the next level is in our win game widget here. So we can just go ahead and connect our next level up to our next level argument here, and now it will know what level to run next. Obviously, it's not going to do anything right now because we haven't set up any other levels, so we actually don't have a next level to go to, but we'll tackle this in the next video. That's going to do it for this video. In the next video, we'll finish up the menus, create a few more levels, and finalize everything, because all we're missing at this point is a main menu, a credits screen, and other levels to play through. With the knowledge that you've currently gained throughout this series, I challenge you to finish this series without watching the next video, or at least attempt it. Let's see if you can do it. If you can, go ahead and leave a comment in the comments below, or in the comments on the next video if you'd like to, but don't worry, we will finish this series off very, very soon. Thank you guys for the incredible support you've given me throughout this series, and I hope to see you in the next one.